find no joy in looking. My joy is in finding and leaving, and that's it. But Paul is talking about Catherine's view of shopping, not mine. He is talking about walking with Jesus and letting his way absorb into who we are over time. He's talking about being, not doing, and becoming, not accomplishing. Encountering him in the scriptures, hanging on to his words, putting his teachings into practice, and following his example. And Paul says that this becomes a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God, a reference to the Old Testament sacrifices, and specifically to the heart that God desires in our offerings. David says in Psalm 141:2, let my prayer be counted as incense before you, and the lifting up of my hands as the evening sacrifice. Those Old Testament offerings, when it came to them, the aroma from the roasting meat on the altar symbolically reached God, and maybe literally, because he's God, he's everywhere, reached God, and he deemed that to be pleasing when accompanied by a heart that was humble before God. In fact, Isaiah, in his first chapter, condemns those who bring their meat to the offerings, to the altar, with hearts that are not humble. So as we walk in this manner, we please God. And that word for pleasing God doesn't just refer to approval, but also enjoyment. And in his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus addresses our anxieties by weaving this enjoyment into the idea of the inheritance that awaits us. Luke 12:32, fear not, little flock, for it is the Father's good pleasure, same word, to give you the kingdom. In other words, in this life, where we all have worries, we all have concerns, God's enjoyment, God's pleasure awaits. Further, in 2 Corinthians 2, Paul says that through Christ, as we walk with Christ, through us, he spreads the fragrance of the knowledge of him everywhere. And then in verse 16, he says, this becomes a fragrance from life to life. Just by walking with Christ, you begin to fulfill the mission of Christ. In Jesus, we become a life-giving presence to the world. You can't do that with a dead faith. You can't do that with a merely intellectual faith, a merely academic faith, a merely a religion of choice. It is a life-giving presence of God through us to the world, through Jesus, that comes through a living faith. And this is our new status. As God's beloved children, we are objects of his affection, heirs to the promise, and recipients of his enjoyment. One of my favorite commercials, I don't even know if it's showing anymore, is of a boy who is walking with a friend to school. Maybe you've seen it. And he says to this boy, my dad is in the NBA. That's the National Basketball Association, by the way. My dad is in the NBA, and his friend is like, wow, and he says, it's true. And then it shows him with the crosswalk guard, who's this tall adult with, the bright yellow on and stuff like that. He says, yeah, my dad's in the NBA. It just shows the guy looking at him. He goes, it's true. And then it shows him telling a teacher that his dad is in the NBA. And then a classmate adding, he never shot a basket or anything, but he's got a ton of assists. And then the school janitor, he asks, is your dad in the NBA? Mine is. And then to a person serving food in the lunch line, he says, he's a big deal. No one believes him, but he's undetracted, undetoured. And he goes to another classmate, and then to an ice cream employee who's serving ice cream, and then to his dentist. And he said, I got 2 teeth extracted the other day. You really can't say this stuff to a dentist when they're doing that. But anyways, I digress. To the dentist, he says, ever heard of him? And to his neighbor, he says, what is your dad this? And he goes, he is a big deal. And what nobody realizes is that he's telling the truth. That his father is a doctor